This is A New Angle, a show about cool people doing awesome things in and around Montana. I'm your host, Justin Angle. This show is supported by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. Hey folks, welcome back, and thanks for tuning in. It's Pledge Week at Montana Public Radio, and last night I teamed up with Lauren Korn of The Right Question to host a live hour. We discussed the value of locally produced public media and asked each other questions about how we make our respective shows. Here is that conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Hey folks, welcome and thanks for tuning in. I'm Justin Angle, host of A New Angle, and I'm here with Lauren Korn, host of The Right Question. Since our shows share this, Lauren, how are you today?
I'm great, Justin.
You knocked me off script right
I know,
at the head.
I'm sorry. I'm so used to welcome to The Right Question.
I know, live radio in action here.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Keep going,
so,
read on.
Yeah, this is your idea, actually. Since our hours since our shows share the 7 o'clock hour here at MTPR, and it's Pledge Week, we teamed up for a live hour tonight to chat about our respective programs. Who we are, how our shows are made, and how we approach that work. So, Lauren, I guess I will start as I do on A New Angle with where did you grow up and what did your parents do?
I grew up slightly south of Helena in Montana City. For those of you that don't know, it's a little bedroom community south of Helena, like I said, in Jefferson County. It's grown a great deal since I grew up there. I grew up in like this very idyllic space, really. I don't know how much land we had. It wasn't a lot, maybe 6 acres or so, but enough to have grown up with horses and to ride around and adventure through the hills. It was a very idyllic, happy childhood. My mom, Jane Fisher, was a clinical psychologist for over 30 years, and she was still practicing in 2020 in private practice when she passed away. And then my dad, Mike Korn, at the time of his retirement, was the deputy chief of law enforcement for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks.
Okay.
And in his retirement, I should say, hi, Dad. I know he's listening. He's still very active with different groups around Helena and around the state that champion wildlife conservation and natural spaces. So that's my...
Super. And you came here for your undergraduate studies, is that right?
Indirectly.
Okay.
I actually took a year off after high school. I went to Helena High School. So even though I was in Montana City, it was, again, a bedroom community to Helena. So yeah, I went to Helena High. I took a year off. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to leave Helena, though.
Okay.
And I took a year off and just worked a little bit, saved some money. And then I started my undergrad at the University of Vermont in Burlington. So I went all the way across the country. And wasn't really all that interested in going to school. I learned a lot, but I just wasn't ready to go to school.
Yeah, Burlington, there's a lot of other things to be interested in, too.
Yeah, I lived in a co-op. We farmed. We were really close with farmers in the area, really involved with sustainable ag in the area. And I went to a lot of concerts. There's a great music scene in Burlington. So yeah, I spent 2 years pretty much not going to school in Burlington. Decided then to move back to Helena.
Yeah, why are you paying tuition if you're not going to school?
Yeah, and I think Burlington, UVM, might be like one of the most expensive public schools.
I think it is the most expensive
in
state
the country.
school.
Yeah. So, I mean, exactly. That's why I moved back. I moved back to Helena. Time off. I was just working. I was kind of a townie. I really loved Helena. When I wasn't a student, or there wasn't that kind of expectation to be a student. But at some point, I was just like, it's time to go back to school. And that's when I moved to Missoula. I actually worked here for a bit before I went back to school.
Super.
So I was like a young non-trad. I think I was in my undergrad when I was in my mid to late 20s. So older than a lot of the students in my classes, but younger than some of the like quote unquote non-trads.
Yeah.
I think there's a specific word for that type of student, but I don't. You're a professor. Do you know that?
I don't really know the technical term.
That's okay.
I think we're actually not using non-traditional anymore, although I don't know. It changes all the time.
All right.
But then you decided to go back east and even further east to the University of New Brunswick, right?
Yeah, I got my master's at the university.
There wasn't enough east left in the United States. You just kept on going.
Right. Yeah. Well, actually, my partner got into a PhD program over there.
Okay.
they write poetry, and they got into the PhD program there, and so I followed them there.
Awesome.
And I guess I just need to live in places before I go to school there, because I was there for a couple of months before I was like, you know what, I got to do something. Okay. So I went to school, I got my master's in poetry, and then moved back here when I got a job with the Montana Book Festival. Yeah, we're going deep into my history.
We are.
Is that okay?
Yeah, let's keep going.
Yeah.
Deeper and deeper.
And I think maybe our listeners might find this story interesting. I get the question a lot, like, how did you come to radio? And I'm going to ask you that question too. But I came to radio because, as the director of the Montana Book Festival, I was updating the website in 2020. Sarah Aronson happened to be one of the authors featured during that particular event.
Right.
And I reached out to her and I was like, Sarah, I need your updated bio to update the website. Sarah sent me her bio and it didn't include the right question. I knew that she was the host. So I was like, Sarah, what's going on? Why is the right question not included in your bio? Are you not doing this anymore? And she's like, no, I'm not. You should do it. It was like so succinct. She was like, you should do it. And
it happened.
I laughed. No. I laughed. I was like, ha, radio. No, thank you. But then the book festival ended in 2020 and it was a seasonal job. And I was like, I need something to do. Apparently I can't be bored. So I actually reached out to the broadcast director here, Ray, and was like, Ray, you still looking for a host? And sort of the rest is history. Michael, Ray, and I had a meeting on Zoom. We were still kind of in the pandemic mode. And I don't know, Michael, you're on the other end of the mic. What was the thought process for you guys behind that decision?
It was one of those wonderful moments where synchronicity, you were available and really interested and with the perfect, I think, interest in literature. That is an interesting and not that common skill set with this combination of an interest in an arts and culture and books. And so you were a natural fit. We knew it from the beginning. We knew you'd be awesome before we even brought you on the air.
What great fortune. Just have the optimal candidate fall into your lap at the right time.
Let me just jump in and tell folks we're still matching pledges.
Oh, amazing.
$1 for $1.
Yeah, we are in the middle of pledge.
$1 for $1.
Yes.
It is pledge drive.
Let's do this.
So if you make a pledge in any amount right now, we will double that pledge. That is continuing right now, 406-243-6400, mtpr.org.
Thanks for that. Yeah, and so I guess I want to say that I still feel very new at this. I'm still very new on the mic. I feel like my erratic energy sometimes trumps good audio, good radio, but I so enjoy this position. But enough about me, Justin. Enough about me. I want to know, where did you grow up and what did your parents do?
Gosh, well, I grew up in a small town called Guilford, New Hampshire. It's kind of in the middle part of the state. You might have some familiarity having spent time in Vermont.
Maybe another small New Hampshire town, but not Guilford.
Yeah, Lake Winnipesaukee is kind of the nearby draw.
Sure,
and so spent my time on the water a lot growing up.
How close is Guilford to, say, Meredith, New Hampshire?
Yeah, it's borders Meredith.
Oh,
so
really?
It's the next town over.
Oh, wonderful. I've been in that area.
High School at Interlake and all at Interlake's High School. So yeah, that's kind of my zone.
Awesome.
So was there, and my mom worked for state government. She worked in the what was called the Department of Employment Security. So people that need benefits when they're in between jobs or get laid off or that sort of.
Did she enjoy that work?
Yeah, I mean, that's a complicated question, Lauren. So my grandfather was kind of an old school Republican and didn't really believe in that sort of government. He also wasn't super supportive of women working, to be honest.
Oh, interesting.
And so I think she was really conflicted about her work throughout her career. And I think she enjoyed helping people, but sort of felt some just tension around it throughout.
Yeah, that's hard.
It was hard for her at times.
Did you feel that in the family?
I knew she just never seemed happy in her job. And I kind of didn't know at the time, like, what on earth is going on here. I didn't really make the connection between my understanding of my grandfather's politics and her upbringing. We hadn't really that sort of discussion of those topics didn't really occur until later when she had retired. So, and my grandfather passed on. So it was kind of, I've understood it later in life. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
My dad worked, he was a paint salesman. So he sold paint and paint sprayers and brushes and all kinds of things paint. So, traveled around the Northeast and sold stuff. So traveling salesman in a lot of ways.
How did your parents meet?
Gosh, well, actually, not too far from New Brunswick. My dad was, he got out of the Navy, and he had grown up in Cape Cod and really just wanted to get away from that world. And he took a job as basically this retired guy had a big fancy sailboat, and he would cruise around Nova Scotia and the Bay of Fundy and the coast of Maine. And he hired my dad to kind of be not quite the captain, because the owner was the captain.
Second mate, or what do you call it?
The guy who did all the actual work. Like sail the boat, take it to where I want it to go, and do the stuff, get the food, cook it.
Sure.
And one day, my dad's friend introduced him to his girlfriend, who happened to become my mother. So if listeners can kind of put that together, slightly scandalous. He invited her to come along on the boat one day, and 3 short months later, they were married.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
That's an amazing story. I love that.
There it goes.
Yeah.
Can I jump in with the phone numbers?
Yeah, we should probably. We're gabbing a lot. We're here to do a job.
It's good.
It's Montana Public Radio's Pledge Drive. We've got a live show happening right now, and we're still doubling your pledges, folks. If you pledge right now in any amount, that will be matched dollar for dollar. All you have to do is call 406-243-6400. That's 406-243-6400, MTPR.org. And this continues the double your match for a little bit longer, so don't delay. 406-243-6400 or MTPR.org.
That's right, and we should probably take a moment to thank some of the people that have already made amazing donations.
Here.
So special thanks to Calvin Murphy. He noted that he has donated previously, but this is his first time being a sustaining member.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's wonderful way to advance your membership. Your contribution is to become a sustaining member. It's not just a one-time thing. If you listen to the radio more than one time, become a sustaining member.
I love that.
And listen more than one time.
I love
that too.
That's a good rule of thumb. Thank you also to Christelle Parker. Christelle is making a gift in her husband's memory, Jim Parker, who loved Montana Public Radio. Thank you so much, Christelle. Roger Sullivan, too. Year in and year out, MTPR is awesome. Thank you so much, Roger.
Thank you to Carolyn Pardini. She has a great message that we should spread, actually. And she says, I heard so many of my friends pledge that it motivated me to up my sustaining pledge. So that peer pressure, I tell my young daughters not to give into it, but listeners, give into it. I donated, you donated. Michael, I'm sure you donated. All these people in here probably are members. I'm sure they are.
Are you a member?
Absolutely.
Good.
Same. And all of us should be more of members, right? Join. Pledge, raise your sustaining pledge, all of that. And tell your friends, because that kind of pressure works.
And you know what? The phone number is 406-243-6400. Write that number down, text it to your friends, tell your friends to become members of Montana Public Radio, or, in the case that we just heard Calvin, upping your pledge.
Tell your friends that their pledge is being doubled now.
And it's being doubled. This is the time. We love our challenges. There's so much energy during our challenges, but now's the time your dollar goes doubly far. So now's the time. 406-243-6400, mtpr.org. I'm Lauren Korn, host of The Right Question. I'm sitting here live with Justin Angle, the host of A New Angle.
That's right. What are we calling this segment?
The Right Angle.
The Right Angle, a new question, something.
I thought about a new question too. I think the right angle sounds better, right? Because it's the right angle. I don't know what that means.
I got accused a lot of being obtuse as a child, so to be called the right angle, I'll get on board with that.
Yeah, I love it.
I'm rarely the right angle in my household. I continue to be primarily obtuse. My wife is the acute one, and my daughter's probably as well.
I think we should roll with it. This is the right angle. for possibly more than once, but definitely tonight only.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Justin, you started our conversation by asking me a question, and I threw it back at you. But this particular question, where did you grow up and what did your parents do? That question was a question that the late Brian Korn asked all of his guests on Home Ground. How did you kind of come to take up the mantle of that question? What's the relationship between you and Brian Korn, or Home Ground and A New Angle?
Yeah, thank you for asking, Lauren. That is our kind of tribute to Brian and the amazing legacy he had, not only in public radio, but beyond. Did incredible work in mediation, in complex issues, bringing disparate parties apart to work through complex issues. And that spirit is the spirit he brought to his radio program, Home Ground, for almost 25 years.
Yeah, a long time.
When I came to Montana, I started listening to his show, and that was kind of my primary entry point, other than drive time, into Montana Public Radio.
Sure.
And it drew me in. And I had the great opportunity to meet Brian. A listener of my podcast at the time had said, you should interview Brian Korn because he does all these amazing interviews, but nobody's really ever asking him questions. Mm-hmm. And we'd love to hear his story. And so I reached out to Brian, and I went up to his home in Helena. We did the interview and kind of became fast friends. Had a wonderful, it was just a wonderful, wonderful man.
Yeah. And
we spent, not only did the interview, went out to lunch, had a wonderful afternoon together, kept in touch. I would stop in, we'd grab a coffee when I was in Helena. I had the great fortune of going on his show as a guest.
Yeah.
A few years back, and then tragically he passed. Although he passed in the out of doors in doing on a hunting trip, and so if there's an appropriate way to go, I think Brian would probably be at peace with that. At least that's the way I think of it.
Yeah.
And through Michael needed somebody to fill that slot. We have, Brian and I certainly have a different style, but I try to bring a similar sensibility to the work, and that is that complicated ideas can be aired and understood through conversation.
Well, looking for a great half-hour interview program was something that immediately became a challenge for us. And to honor that space, which we had, as you know, Brian was on the air for 25 years.
Yeah.
Right.
So having a place to put something that, we really wanted in-depth conversations. Your show was so perfect. It was a synchronistic moment again, I think. And it's so great that your podcast worked into radio so delightfully. I hope you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that would be something maybe useful. Before we entered, we had the honor of sort of taking that spot on the Montana Public Radio airwaves. We kind of operated as a weekly podcast, but had no real. I kind of targeted 40 minutes an episode, but it wasn't a hard cut. We didn't edit a ton. Some episodes were over an hour. I just sort of let the conversation go where it went.
Yeah.
And then coming into the radio format and having to hit a time and have some structure and have some resets where we re-informed listeners that, hey, this is what you're listening to. It really, an MTPR supporting the show, giving us some of the great Nick Mott's time to really do a proper finishing edit on the show. It really rounded out our processes. It got me, I think, more prepared and tighter in my preparation. Mm-hmm. More prepared in my preparation. That's a good live radio moment right there.
It's good.
So I felt like the show really took a leap forward in terms of its quality, the content and the production quality. And as we were thinking about, okay, how are we going to get this thing down to a half an hour? Sometimes the interviews are kind of about bio a lot, but a lot of times they're not. It's like we got a specific couple things to talk to with this guest, and I don't want to burn so many minutes on bio. And Brian's way of having a standardized question, it established intimacy and connection with the guest that the listener could understand and identify with quickly. And so it served a very functional purpose for A New Angle, but it also allowed us to, in some ways, tip our hat to Brian's legacy. And we're filling the spot that he filled so well for so long. And it is an honor. It's an honor we take seriously. And that's our little way of reminding ourselves that we are part of a much bigger picture. And as members of the Montana Public Radio family, we are carrying on an important tradition as well. And I think you probably share that sensibility in your work too.
I hope so. If our listeners are out there listening to this live conversation of The Right Angle, it's a live crossover episode of The Right Question and a New Angle. And I hope, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with Home Ground. Now's the time to show your support for conversational radio, what we do. 406-243-6400, mtpr.org. We have a dollar for dollar match going on through the hour, so now is the time. If you are a fan of A New Angle, The Right Question, and, specifically and in honor of Brian Kahn of Home Ground, which I'm sure so many of you miss, now is the time to call. Dollar for dollar match, 406-243-6400, mtpr.org. Justin, you were saying that, the shows Home Ground and A New Angle aren't, specifically the same. Mm-hmm. But I think you're right in that there is a sensibility, a tone, or a tenor. You also said that, a listener of yours or a listener of Brian's came and said, Brian hasn't been interviewed.
Yeah.
But I think what made Home Ground so wonderful was that even though he hadn't been given questions, those questions weren't directed at him, he somehow found a way to, certainly connect with everyone that he talked to. But I feel the way that I'm sure many listeners do, in that they knew him. Right? They knew about him. It wasn't like he was silent in the conversations, and he wasn't just asking questions. He was providing context and knowledge and some of his background too.
I think I think you're right. He did not make himself the subject of his conversations.
Right.
But over the years, you could sort of understand who he was in a really complex way and a genuine way too. And I think he injected enough of himself that you could certainly tell that he was not interested in trying to get to simplicity. He was interested in investigating complexity and where people disagree and why they disagree, and trying to figure out bridges to connect them. And, oftentimes in a disagreement, in an argument, whether it's family, friends, or whatever, it's easy to try to, or it's tempting to try to find the easy way out. That, hey, there's got to be some simple thing that connects us. And, sometimes there is, but oftentimes it takes a lot of going around and a lot of going deeper on an issue and probing again with a question and trying to get to the question underneath the question. Mm-hmm. And I think Brian was very skilled at that, but also he did not let his guests get away with shallow answers. He would press them on it.
Sure.
And press them for evidence of claims. And so I thought that form of didn't come across as aggression to me. It came across as like, okay, you're coming on my show and I'm going to ask you some direct questions. You might perceive them as hard, but they're going to be coming from a place of genuine interest in understanding who you are and why you think the way you do. A New Angle is supported by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and UM's College of Business. Access to capital, broadband, and education are 3 ingredients any community needs for success.
I'm Larry Summers, Harvard President Emeritus and former Treasury Secretary. You're listening to A New Angle.
And in your show, Justin, I feel like there, again, is that similar sensibility, maybe a little bit less pressing, but I want to talk, if you want to go in this direction already, we wanted,
Sure.
when I came to you with this idea of kind of this live crossover episode, I thought it would be really interesting to talk about the process, because while we both inhabit conversational spaces and we both inhabit this specific time, this 29-minute period, our shows are very different. And I thought it would be really interesting to give listeners a sense of how our shows are produced. And I think maybe the transitional question here I'm looking for is how you choose the people you bring onto your show, how you choose your guests, and when you decide what you're talking about, right? Like, obviously each guest has their thing, their niche. But, when we're talking about pressing questions or opposing opinions, how do you navigate those things? How do you reconcile those things?
Yeah, I often think about what can the audience learn from this guest? And, I don't want to give the audience stories they've already heard, versions of reality that they're already comfortable with and in some ways maybe agree with and feel safe with. I want to give them things that they have to kind of confront and mull over. And that's not sort of an in-your-face sensibility, but it is I think we live in a world where most of us self-select into informational ecosystems that confirm our existing ideas, or it's very tempting to do that.
And I feel like social media, the internet, like those spaces, they do that for you, right?
And that is, we should take a moment to highlight, this is Montana Public Radio, or this is Pledge Week, and call 406-243-6400 and donate and participate in supporting this enterprise, because this is one of the only spaces where there is not an algorithm driving you to more extreme positions, right? There is not a profit incentive driving the sort of fracture of our information ecosystem.
Right.
We have a model here in public media where we can not participate in that. We have a funding model that is not driven by advertiser dollars and not driven by trying to monetize our audience into clicking on something. And that sounds a little cynical, but if you think about it, that is one of the market forces that is driving our polarization as a country. And I don't want to participate in that. We asked the question of how did you come to public radio, to radio? Mm-hmm. I came for that reason. I was in the podcast space. I'm a business school professor. There are plenty of ways to monetize a podcast.
Sure.
Plenty of ways to pursue that path. And we have the generous support of some private sponsors, and I'm grateful for that. But at the same time, I wanted to reach more people. I wanted ideas to get out to more people. And I didn't want people to have to pay for that. And I wanted it to be in a space where, we did not have any kind of corporate interest either deciding who gets access to the content, who is served the content, and or what the content is.
Sure.
And that's been a gift, both in terms of working with Montana Public Radio and with the University of Montana. They've been supportive of the project from the start and have never once tried to say, like, hey, we really think you should tell these stories or talk to this guest. At the same time, being a part of the university has afforded us great access to some amazing folks coming through this campus community.
Sure. Okay, so...
Did I answer your question? I feel like I meandered and dodged.
To be honest, Justin, I don't even remember what the question was.
That's a successful answer.
That I completely agree. Okay, so the question isn't so much why public radio.
Yeah.
I think everyone sitting on the mic right now can answer that question very vividly and beautifully. But why podcasts in the first place? Why did you decide that the podcast conversation is where you wanted to place, your curiosity?
Sure.
How did A New Angle begin before it came to Montana Public Radio?
What's the origin story?
The origin story.
Yeah, so as some listeners may know, my day job is I'm a professor in the College of Business here. I teach strategy and branding and marketing. And I'd been developing an online version of my course. I had been using podcasts and other things, many public radio podcasts. We had used some on the media programming. I had used some episodes of Freakonomics and Marketplace. And I'd been starting to use audio in place of readings with my students. And for a couple of reasons. One, I just found that students were much more likely to listen to something than to read something. It would lead to better retention and better understanding of the content and richer classroom conversations. And also, our students here at the University of Montana, we mentioned non-traditional students, we have a ton that are doing, they're working 4 or 5 jobs to put their way through school. They're a student athlete, they're in a drama production, whatever the case may be. They have a ton of things happening.
Right.
And it's difficult. It's difficult to do all the things you need to do as a student, but I felt like I could get better outcomes in the classroom and make the content more accessible. And so that seemed like a great way to do it. And
as I was developing content for my own course, I thought, well, why don't I build a podcast and interview interesting folks that are doing work that would illustrate the concepts to bring them to life?
Who, if not your students, then who was your, if you had one, an intended audience? What was your thought process
Well, at
behind that?
first it was just students.
It was literally just the students.
Yeah, I
Okay.
developed this like private podcast and I put it on it's called an LMS, learning management system, like the class website basically.
Yeah.
And then as I was starting to do these interviews, I was thinking, well, I kind of like doing these interviews.
Yeah.
And if you think back to 2018 when this was starting for A New Angle, the University of Montana was kind of in a tough spot. Enrollment was kind of at its lows, morale wasn't great, and we weren't doing a great job of telling positive stories about ourselves, of which there are many.
There's so many, yeah.
And so it felt great to be kind of highlighting some of those positive stories. And I thought, there is an audience for this. And so I just started kind of with a borrowed mic in my office, recording conversations and throwing them out there. And it's gained some traction and some support. And it allowed us to invest in better equipment and better editing. And I got it to the point where the weakest piece of the entire production is the host. And that feels good to be
That's
the weakest
how I
link.
feel.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So we share that. And yeah, that was kind of it. And from the start, we didn't make it a new angle on business. We made it a new angle in such a way that we could, I can always fall back on businesses and do some entrepreneurship. At the time, there was a great MTPR podcast called Can Do.
Oh,
my
yeah.
colleague Arnie Sherman. So they were kind of focused on the entrepreneurship space here in Western Montana. And so I wanted to do kind of more of a current affairs show. And that afforded us the opportunity to kind of talk about anything we wanted to talk about. And I often feel like that's where the best learning happens anyway. So yeah, that's kind of how it came to be.
It's so interesting that this whole enterprise for you began because you wanted an accessibility for students.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people turn to Montana Public Radio without doing so like very explicitly. Like it's background for so many people while they're making dinner, while they're, driving home from work.
Probably right now as we
Right
speak.
now, yeah. There are folks out there that are doing something else while listening to Montana Public Radio. And I think that's really wonderful that there was an intention for you in that, because I think you're right. I think that we all live such busy lives, and yet we want to be engaged with, and we want to engage with things. And I think that the audio space, the oral space, is really, really important in that realm.
It's a soundtrack for so many people's lives. That is, cliche. I've heard it before, absolutely. But I think it's apt. I mean, I grew up, with Car Talk in the background.
Oh, sure.
And Prairie Home Companion. And then I entered into This American Life World and Radio Lab and these just iconic, and then all the wonderful, National Public Radio news programs. And it just was always there. And if you're one of those folks that think like, oh yeah, public radio is always there, you should contribute. You should be a member. You should sustain the operation. MTPR.org, 406-243-6400. This is Pledge Week. We are trying. And is the dollar for dollar match still on, Mike?
It is indeed.
Okay, so now is the time.
Yes, your pledge is being doubled right now, folks. And do you want to do some celebrating? What do we need?
Oh, let's celebrate.
163. Well, let's celebrate. Let's pause for celebration.
Let's
Okay.
pause.
And celebrate for $163,000.
I don't know where my noisemaker is, but thanks, Suzanne. Suzanne's got her maracas over there.
MTPR.org or 243-6400, 243-6400 to pledge your support right now and have whatever you choose to donate doubled right now. 243-6400.
So, Lauren, the hour is slipping away here.
I know.
And I will
I
not
think we
let
were
it slip
worried.
away without knowing what a fish trap fellow is.
Oh.
You are one.
I am
for
one.
The 2022 year at least. Tell me what a fish
Yeah.
trap fellow is. I would say congratulations, but that
You
feels
can.
a little. Sure, congratulations. I don't know what I'm congratulating you
It's a
for,
great deal. It's a big deal, I think. There is a writing retreat, I suppose you'd call it, a residency in Joseph, Oregon, in the Wallowa Lake area. The
beautiful
Wallowa,
country.
so beautiful. It's called Fish Trap. It's writing It's for writers who are writing in and about the West. It's a really, really wonderful organization. It's very small, very intimate. But this year, 2022, I was named a Fish Trap Fellow, which basically meant that I could go and spend a week without having to pay for anything and write. I took a writing workshop with the prose writer Beth Piatote. She's an Indigenous author, and was able to kayak and make really long-lasting relationships and friendships and connections and not have to worry about anything. So
Yes.
I took a week off from my radio duties, and I just hung out in the Wallowas and wrote as much as I could.
Awesome. And do you feel like it advanced your project in your writing?
Justin, I don't know that I have a specific project right now. I think that one thing that The Right Question has done for me is kind of solidified the idea, at least in my mind, that as much as I love to write, and I will probably always write, my work in quote unquote the writing sphere or the publishing industry is always, not always, I'm not gonna be that definitive. But right now it's on the back end. I want to be an advocate for other writers and build up other people and help others. And to be honest, quite honest, I'm a much better editor than I ever have been a writer.
Sure.
And so just supporting writers and the work that I do in The Right Question and outside the studio as well, that's the work I want to center right now. So I think that Fish Trap, it was amazing. I got to write. I got to focus on myself for a week. That's not something that some of us get to do all that often.
It is. It does seem like a luxury.
Yeah, it
a
really,
wonderful
it
gift.
really was. Yeah, so I'm so grateful. And yeah, like I said, I had some wonderful relationships grow and nurture in that space, and lifetime friendships. Certainly some really great writing relationships, but that is what a Fish Trap Fellow is. You get to spend a week in the Wallowas.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I would sign up if I could, but it's got to be.
You probably could.
Well,
Well,
you got to be, one, a good writer, which you probably are, and two, like, have a tremendous resume in the literary space, which you do. So it's a big honor.
It is a big honor, and I'm very thankful for Fish Trap, the organization, for letting me be a fellow and come to the Wallowas and to hang out with them for a week this summer. But Justin, you could be a Fish Trap Fellow, not only because of your gigantic resume, but because you too are a writer. And I didn't anticipate this being the transition to this question, but you are writing a book.
I am trying in collaboration with Nick Mott. Nick and I and Victor Iveas collaborated on a 6-part series, a podcast series about wildfire called Fireline. It was supported. It was brought to life in many ways by the support of the MTPR team. Josh Burnham, Korn, Cates Carney, Michael, Ray, the whole crew here really embraced the project. And I think another sort of moment of serendipity, I came to Josh sort of saying that, I'm thinking about doing this podcast about wildfire. And he said, I've really wanted for us to be affiliated with a podcast about wildfire. And so, that show was amazing to work on. And I learned so much about narrative radio, narrative podcasting. I mean, it was not...
Which is a different beast than conversational radio.
Oh my gosh, totally
Yeah.
different animal.
Yeah.
And so much more complex and so much more time intensive. And this project took a few years, and then COVID happened in the middle of it and changed a lot of our thinking about how the show would lay out. And then it came together in the spring of 2021. It was, I think it was well received by the listeners.
I mean, it's an
And-
award-winning podcast, right? It won
yeah.
at least one of the episodes, or is it the full podcast? Won an Edward R.
I
Murrow
don't exactly
Award.
know. I mean, we could ask Korn because he submitted the entry. I think they do recognize a particular episode, and that was our episode about firefighters.
Oh, sure.
And with a particular focus on how the job has gotten a lot harder. Fire seasons have gotten 80 days longer over the last 15 years. 80 days is a long time
That's
for
a long
that,
time.
that intensity of work. The fires have gotten bigger, hotter, more destructive, so it's a harder job under harder conditions, and they're doing it for longer. And more of these folks doing it are contractors and not full-time employees, so there's all sorts of benefits issues there to navigate. And our institutions are not built for how the job is right now. And that's not necessarily a fault of the institutions. Institutions have moved slower than the conditions on the ground have moved in many ways. And so, that was the episode we submitted. We won a regional Murrow Award over the summer, and then we somehow won the national category.
So many congratulations.
Thanks. And
really
it was
wonderful.
It was super fun. We just got back from a trip to New York City for the awards gala.
How was it?
It was a blast. I mean,
we saw pictures of you in a tux.
I know. Amazing. It was super fancy.
You're wearing a tux now.
There you go.
That's radio.
That is the magic of radio.
It is the radio
Yes.
tux. I will say, though, speaking of tux and appearance, you could tell the difference between the radio journalists and the television journalists. Television journalists were much more put together.
I had a very similar, but not to that maybe the scale, but a similar experience at the EB Craney Awards this year.
Yeah.
There was a difference between the television and the radio folks for sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of those television folks are a lot smaller than you think they are. Everybody kept telling me, you are a lot taller than we thought, and like Lester Holt, you are tiny.
Do you sound short, Justin? I've never thought of what someone sounds like on like their height.
Okay, so if you think I sound tall, call 406-243-6400 and pledge $100.
Wow, you're just going for it.
If you think I sound short, call 406-243-6400 and pledge $100.
And it's $1 for $1 match. So whether you think Justin is tall or short, which I think you already gave away the answer, but whether you think he's tall or short, it's $1 for $1 match. $100, $1. Anything. We're looking for everything you can give us right now. MTPR.org 406-243-6400.
I want to play an announcement real quick and let
sure.
people know that you're listening to The Right Angle. How cool is this?
It is The Right Angle.
We'll be right back.
MTPR is supported by Masterpiece Carpet One and Lighting One in Kalispell, an independent member of the 1,000-store Carpet One Floor and Home Cooperative. Online at masterpiececarpetone.kalispell.com.
You're listening to Montana Public Radio, a special live program here on a Thursday night. MTPR.org or 406-243-6400. And yes, we continue to double your pledges right now.
It's a big deal.
Yes, $1 for $1 match continues. 406-243-6400, MTPR.org. I'm Michael Marcelic, Justin Angle, and Lauren Korn are here.
I mean, we talk a lot on our show. I do a monthly segment, or monthly episode with an economist, Bryce Ward, who many listeners know and know his voice, know his wisdom. And we've talked a fair amount in the last year about inflation, right?
Okay.
And it is a challenge for all of us. It's not one of those forces that hits people equally either. If you are, it's a pernicious force in our economy right now, and there's tons of debates and consternations about how to kind of get it under control or deal with it. But inflation's a hard force. The $1 for $1 match is a tailwind financially. I mean, when else can you get double the results for the money? In this environment, you cannot. I don't know how silky a segue that was from inflation to the $1 for $1 match,
silky.
but I was trying.
It was very silky. And Ann Hostler has been saying that it's not often that we get these kind of bonuses, these kind of challenges in real life where your dollars are matched or that there are these bonuses. Now is the time. 406-243-6400. Be the sound of the ringing that you are hearing over the radio. It's such a sweet sound. 406-243-6400. Or if you're online, go to mtpr.org. Justin, right before we went back on the air after that short underwriter, I asked you, what do you want to talk about? And I didn't hear you. What do you want to talk about now?
Well, we talked about process because you and I, we talk a little bit about how we approach our shows, and my sense is it's quite different.
Well, it's so funny that you went from what ultimately was a long form, 40 plus minutes, and you had to adjust into the short form, which is about half an hour, 29 minutes. I, too, have to fit my weekly show into 29 minutes, but I have apparently refused refused that boundary. And so for listeners who are curious, my shows recorded are an hour plus.
Yeah.
We do a lot of editing, and it's sometimes a good thing. I'm not the best at live radio. Can you tell?
They seem like
I'm
natural
doing
to me.
okay. I'm doing okay. But yeah, it's a whole different beast. Live radio is, and so I'm usually very grateful that there's an editing hand. Right now, that editing hand, is Chris Moyles. I'm so grateful for his help. He's my co-producer, editor, sound engineer most of the time. And so I imagine that your conversations are 40 minutes max now?
Yeah, max. And I get a little flack from Nick if I go anything over 40.
Yeah.
Our process is constrained by resources in many ways. And I don't mean financial resources, although, this is Pledge Week and the entire enterprise benefits from our generous donors, 406-243-6400, MTPR.org.
Good plug.
Got to keep plugging that. But it's more a question of time.
I mean, and that's an issue for us too, right? And that's maybe the biggest issue, because I think that if my team, which again is now just me and Chris, if we had all the time in the world, we could do exclusive web episodes where you're getting like full conversations. But I guess my question is, and maybe we answered it at the very beginning of our conversation with this question that you ask all of your guests. But, for me, the extended conversation, when we're hitting that 45-minute mark, when we're hitting that hour mark, and in some cases over the hour mark, you never know when someone's going to give you good audio.
That's true.
And so, for me, that's a benefit, because we can pull question and answers from later in the conversation, and, we can kind of piece it together in a way that feels fluid. Whereas, if you're on the mic for 30 or 35 minutes and that's it, I can't say that you don't know what you're going to miss, but there is, that opportunity for more that is gone. That seems obvious.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's obvious. And you kind of sometimes don't understand that while you're in it.
Yeah.
And that would be an interesting question for you. I mean, some folks ask me, like, hey, how do you think that interview went? And oftentimes the ones that I come out of feeling exhausted and a little exacerbated end up being the best ones. Because I think that I've learned over the 5 years of doing this that kind of feeling of cognitive fatigue when I leave is a sign that I was working really hard to learn something and to try to translate that or to shape that learning into something the audience could learn from. And it's become a marker of what I think are some of our better episodes, or at least when I sort of reflect on them. The ones that feel easy and fun maybe are a little too light, and I didn't lean into it enough. I haven't really gotten a full handle on it. What's been your experience of like how you feel in the interview, your experience of yourself as an interviewer, and how does that translate to the product that goes on the air?
I like that question. I don't know that there is kind of a template. If I feel one way, then the interview went one way. I think that it is really easy to know at the end of an interview, like, oh, that's going to be an easy one to edit. There's so much gold in there. Or at the end of an interview where it's, oh, that one, there was a lot of tangents. I did a poor job of restating or clarifying questions or allowing for easy transitions. That one, because let's face it, listeners, it's usually my fault. But that might be a little bit harder to edit. But thinking about the differences between our podcasts and our radio programs, even though they are both conversational, I don't know. I guess I'm going to throw a question at you,
Sure.
and then maybe I'll come back and try to clarify what I have in mind here. But like, what are the differences between our shows, Justin?
Well, when we were kind of thinking about this, I mean, your show starts with the book in many ways. And a lot of times it's hard to separate, or maybe impossible to separate a writer from their book. Mm-hmm. But I think the focus of the conversation is a particular piece of work that this person has done.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And that becomes the sort of central, thread of the episode.
Yep.
With our episodes, the central thread is the person. Sometimes the person has written a book. I've interviewed a handful of authors, and that's something that we've talked about in our collaboration is, hey, it has to be kind of a book that doesn't fit as well in your show, or a moment that doesn't fit as well.
Yeah, we've had those conversations where we have some
that.
overlapping ideas for guests, or certainly publicists have reached out to us both, and then we have to kind of decide, because, it wouldn't have been an issue when we didn't share this hour, but,
Exactly.
Now that we do, it's a conversation that we have to see maybe how each author or that author fits 1.5 hour better.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you're right?
And it's come up a handful of times, and I feel like it's been a great mechanism for us to get to know each other a little bit better.
I agree.
And I've come to really appreciate and understand your approach to your work in ways through those conversations. And I hope, you of me, and I think it's made for a really great collaboration and friendship. So thank you, Lauren.
Oh, thank you, Justin. That was sweet.
Can I jump in with
Please.
one comment here, you guys? This is such a great hour of radio on Montana Public Radio. And I mean tonight, this is really fascinating, and this is, I'm glad you did this. But just in general, the 7 o'clock hour is really important to Montana Public Radio. And this combination, I didn't know it would be quite as great as it is. It always consistently makes my phone ring. It's the kind of thing where I think you guys are both creating an awful lot of driveway moments out there. And the shows complement each other really well in that hour, I think. I think you learn a lot. I think you have the time to go deep, and that's something in public broadcasting that's such a rarity. There's so many media outlets that have just the sound bites and the 5-minute stories, and even on the network they're limited. They do something on NPR that's 12 minutes long. That's a big deal, and you get to do these deep dives, and it makes for great radio. So program director's happy.
That's good. It's
That's
good to keep you
important.
happy.
And if we're keeping you, the listeners, happy, now is the time to donate. We're still in the middle of this dollar for dollar match tonight. Help us meet the goals that we have. I think it's $300,000. We are running out of time, but we are so glad to be here. Justin, I'm so glad to be sitting here with you tonight. If you're enjoying our conversation, go to 406. Don't go to 406. Dial 406-243-6400, or go to, if you're online, mtpr.org. Justin, we were talking about earlier kind of the tone and the tenor of the shows, and I don't know that I would call it a difference, but I do think there is a separation between our shows in that, I had to make a decision really early on when I came on board, the right question, what kind of questions I wanted to ask.
Sure.
And I decided really early on, because, I read a book and perhaps there's something I don't agree with, or there's, something, the way that it's written, I don't quite understand or agree with, and my first inclination, I can be kind of a cynic in that way, and my first inclination might be to press an author. Why, tell me more about this. Like, what did you mean by that? And sometimes that is my first inclination, but I, again, had to make a decision pretty early on, and I mentioned this advocacy, that this show was going to lift authors up. And so pressing authors in that way was not going to be my MO. And I feel like, you're able to get at certain things that, what did you say earlier? Like it's pressing, but it's not, I forget what you were saying.
Yeah, I don't consider our show to be like adversarial journalism.
Yeah.
At our core, we try to pursue guests who our audience can learn from, but also our general sensibility is to celebrate great work being done. That might not be great work that you agree with or you agree how it's done, but I think the guests that I seek out are, like I said, they're people we can learn from and people that we can find some way to respect and to celebrate. That's not to say I try not to shy away from complicated topics. I try to seek them out and press on them, but in a way of trying to just find understanding. Help me understand what you're doing. And then there's been a couple moments in interviews where, it felt like, oh, I could have really leaned into that and really pressed on it and kind of taken a more of an argumentative stand. But as I kind of reflect on those experiences and as I live through them, I sort of felt like, no, I gave the guest the opportunity to explain how he or she thinks and why, and that should speak for itself. I don't necessarily need to do more than that. And in some ways, like Michael mentioned a moment ago, the longer form program gives us the opportunity to, if it's a bad idea that you don't agree with, you're going to be able to understand at least how that person that I'm interviewing, or that's my goal, is for you to understand how that person arrived at that way of thinking, whether you agree with it or not. And that doesn't, I think that happens better through a spirit of understanding than it does through a spirit of argument.
Yeah, antagonism.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Lauren, I guess, what makes for a book or a writer that you want to interview? Like, how do you kind of make selection choices about who comes on the show and why?
Yeah, I think it's half and half, or 50-50. 50-50, one half being this is an author that I learn about myself. It might be someone who is in my literary sphere, who I know about just by reputation or have read. I think that, and I'm sure you can speak in a similar manner about some of the guests that you have on your show, like that you admire them so much.
Yeah.
I fangirl a lot on my show, and it's a real privilege to be able to talk to authors that I love, like really, really love. And yeah, so I guess half of it is me reaching out to publicists and authors, being like, I know you have this book out, or I know you are representing this author who has this book coming out. I would love to interview them. I would say, 9 times out of 10, people say yes, which is a joy to know and to learn and to take advantage of, really. And then the other half is authors and publicists reaching out to me.
Sure. People on book tour, people trying to sell books.
Yep, exactly, because it is a business, and being on a podcast will get you readers and will get you that business. This was another decision I had to make early on. Again, when I came onto the right question and into the MTPR family, was how I was going to curate my selections, because both Cherie Newman and Sarah Aronson, they've really focused on the local, and I think that was so important. And I think it is so important that we have local programming and local voices. I came from a industry, I keep using that word, but my background is so much more broad than just Montana or regional writers. And I thought that was a good thing, right?
Yes.
I have a good, toolbox. I have good connections that I can bring into this sphere. And, I really do try to make decisions, if it's not a Montana author, if it's not a regional author, if it is a national or international author, I have to make the decision, like, is this a voice that Montana needs to hear? Is it a voice that's missing in Montana? And that question has to, the answer has to be yes. Like, is this something that, Montana would love to hear or needs to hear? And that's kind of the conversation that I have with myself when I'm choosing authors. And you don't have that many, there's how many weeks in a year, so you have to say no to some and yes to others. But it's a joy. And I can't say how much of a privilege it is to have people be like, yeah, I want to be on your show and have the opportunity to talk with them.
Let me jump in for just a moment as our hour is getting close.
Yeah.
Your pledge opportunity is ending shortly at the end of this show. You've got about 5 minutes or so left to get your pledge doubled tonight.
Now's
Don't
the time.
delay. If you've been wondering, like, should I do this? Should I not do it right now? We are very happy to have this incredibly generous offer and lots of dollar for dollar matches happening this evening. Thank you to all of you that have contributed already, and to the very generous donors who've been supporting the evening. But don't delay now. We have just a few minutes left in that. So call 243-6400. If you get a busy signal, call back 243-6400 or mtpr.org.
So Justin, can I put that question on you? I feel like I rambled for a few minutes. How do you choose your guests?
Lauren, I have to say, like, as we close out this hour collaboration, I feel like your answer articulated in many ways how we select guests at a new angle. What is it that a Montanan can learn from this guest? And we have the great fortune of being in a wonderful community here in Missoula and in the state of Montana. There are incredible people here already that we can all learn from, but there are incredible people that come through this community. They either speak on campus or in town or come here to take advantage of the tremendous theater, outdoor opportunities, so much that this great state has to offer. And those sorts of people, many of them are the sorts of people that, they have a national, international profile, but our local audience can learn from them.
Sure.
And so I think that is kind of a theme that unites our shows in many ways. What does Montana need? And one thing that Montana needs is Montana Public Radio.
They do.
And they need your support. So thank you for listening to Lauren and I for this hour. If you like what you hear and you like the other great programming here at Montana Public Radio, support us. 406-243-6400, mtpr.org. Lauren, this has been a pleasure.
Such a pleasure. It sounds like with this hopeful book coming out, Justin, this won't be the last time we'll be in conversation.
I see many more awesome conversations having. You are a cool
Incredible.
person doing awesome things. So
Back at you, Justin
welcome.
Angle. Thanks so much for joining us for this crossover of The Right Question and a New Angle. We've been calling it The Right Angle.
It works.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to A New Angle. We really appreciate it. And we're coming to you from Studio 49, a generous gift from UM alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. A New Angle is presented by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. With additional support from Consolidated Electrical Distributors, Drum Coffee, and Montana Public Radio. Keely Larson is our producer. VTO, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks made our music. Editing by Nick Mott. Social media by AJ Williams, and Jeff Neese is our master of all things sound. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.